Yes, I was gonna actually read it. Thank you. Here, got it.
All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Public Needs Assessment for our 5-year HUD Consolidated Plan. This is one of 5 needs assessment meetings. We have one for every district to establish priorities for the 5-year plan and the city's fiscal year 2024 and program year 2023 HUD allocations. And as most of you know me in the room, I'm Leticia Canmore. I'm the program manager for neighborhood services. And we're the pass-through for HUD funding. Our department is neighborhood services. This year, the city received $2.6 million from the Community Development Block Grant, $1.3 million from the Home Investment Partnerships Program, and $235,000 for the Emergency Solutions Grant. So I'm going to give a short introduction and then presentation, and then we're going to leave it up for questions and answers. We'll talk about what district 4 feels that are the needs for this particular area, and see if the needs assessment meetings is a requirement for HUD for citizen participation and also to comply with our local citizen participation plan. And so we value your input. Con plan. We do have the microphone, so you're more than welcome to come up and speak, but you can also speak from your area. We'll just turn the podium around. So we a few housekeeping items. If as you're walking into the library, you saw the restrooms directly to your left. There's also, again, we've already talked about the microphone. You will have the opportunity to comment and share your input and ask questions. You'll have that time. We want the majority of the time to be able to do that. You may also write your comments down. There's little memo pads in the back, and we have staff that can walk through here and give you that and some pens. If you don't want to speak tonight, that's okay. If you want to write your notes. And then at the end of Bill's presentation, he will also have some contact information, and we have business cards at the sign-in sheet. We just ask you please be courteous and keep conversations. The meeting is going to be recorded, and Bill will talk to that. And then you'll also have the opportunity to email us directly, again, the neighborhood services staff. So I'll be your primary contact, Leticia Canmore, and that's at leticiak@cctexas.com. And then Tracy Cantu, who couldn't be here with us today, Assistant Director. Her email is Tracy, TRACEYC for Cantu, @cctexas.com. This time, I would like to introduce Council Member Dan Suckley for a few opening remarks, and then we will pass over the meeting to Mr. Wazowski.
Good evening, everybody. I know several of y'all here, and just want to introduce myself to those that don't know me. I'm the District 4 councilman. I will be at least until next fall. So accessible, and anybody needs to reach me, I can be reached at dan.suckley@cctexas.com, and my cell phone is 960-4077. It's on the city website as well. But just wanted to tell everybody, appreciate everybody being here, and the community input's important, and calculating what their needs are. So I hope you guys do that. And thanks again. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay, Bill, again. He's with M&L Associates. So with that, Bill, if you want to go ahead and get started.
Thanks, Leticia, and I want to thank everyone that's doing this evening. First off, I want to introduce my colleague, Maya Smiley. She's here to help us take good notes so that we make sure we get every comment that you all provide. taping this session. Again, it's only for our internal use. It will not be publicized. We want to make sure we capture every comment that you make accurately, and we reflect a little bit of a PowerPoint overview that's going to kind of go through the programs, the planning process, and the schedule. But really, we want to really make sure we reserve enough time. Would please bear with me. I'm going to try to share my screen here. So as you can see, as we provided as part of the introduction, we've been carrying out these council district meetings for the last 3 evenings. This is the 4th one. There'll be one more on Monday. Encourage anyone to come to all the meetings or one of the meetings to provide your comments as well. And we're going to be focusing tonight on the fiscal year 2023-2027 5-year HUD consolidated plan and the fiscal year 24 program year 23 annual action plan. And these are related to the federal funds that the Corpus Christi gets every year from HUD. And they are the Community Development Block Grant Program, CDBG for short, the Home Investment Partnerships Program, HOME for short, and the Emergency Solution Grant Program, ESG for short. And just to kind of some context, we've gotten questions in other sessions. These programs are not, these funding allocations that the city gets are not determined by the city. HUD provides those directly to the city. It is based on a formula that HUD provides to each municipality across the country. It's an internal formula that they use based on low mod percentages, poverty percentages, and census data. And they don't share that formula, but these are allocation amounts that change every year. So when you see the actual allocations that the city receives under these programs, the city did not determine these amounts. These were provided to by HUD, and they're based on the federal fiscal year budget every year. And then just before we get into it, just for some context, I just wanted to provide several themes that we've heard during the other sessions that we've had this week, just so you kind of get a context of the kind of comments that folks were making. We heard overwhelming need for additional shelters, homeless shelters, shelter services, more affordable housing, rental assistance, as we call town-based rental assistance. And so people have been very vocal about that. And so I just wanted to provide some context as we move forward. We have heard that, and we've got good input related to that. So with that said, I wanted to kind of provide just an agenda in a little bit more detail. So I'm going to provide just a brief overview of the 5-year consolidated plan and the planning process. For some context for discussion purposes, we're going to outline what the city identified as priorities during the fiscal year 2018 through 2022 5-year consolidated plan. The city's in its last year of its current 5-year plan. And that's the purpose of this meeting. We are here to talk about needs related to homelessness, affordable housing, and community development within the community, so that we can accurately prepare and provide the city with information and data related to information we obtain related to creating and prioritizing funding priorities for the next 5 years. I'm also going to provide a little bit of an overview of how the city used its current year, fiscal year 24, program year 23 federal funds, just so you can get a sense of what the city is using these funds for in the final year of their current 5-year plan. And then I'm just going to provide a very brief overview of both Community Development Block Grant, Home, and ESG program basics, what's eligible, what's not eligible, and just some context so you can see the framework of these programs and what they're allowed to fund and what they're not allowed to fund. And then finally, as I said, we want to reserve the majority of the time for input from you all in terms of how you feel, what the needs are in the community, how the needs have changed over the last 5 years, what those priorities should be as they relate to housing and homeless needs and affordable housing and community development needs within the community. So what is a HUD 5-year consolidated plan? This is required for all HUD funding. So every 5 years, and we'll get into this a little bit later, the city must update its 5-year plan and reflect any changes in priorities or funding needs within the community. This new 5-year plan will cover October 1st, 2023, and it'll end in September 30th, 2028. And so the HUD prescribes very specific components to a HUD 5-year consolidated plan. And as you can see on the screen, Uh, They include stakeholder consultation, which this is part of these sessions that we're having in each of the council districts. And we'll get into a little bit later, a little bit more detail. We're going to also do stakeholder sessions with folks that serve these populations, low mod populations, in the month of April, but we'll get to that a little bit later. We're also required to provide a housing and homeless needs assessment and a housing market analysis. These are data information that we receive during the planning process. It could be derived from census data that's provided to us by HUD. It could also be information that we receive during the planning process from local organizations who may have done a housing analysis or a homeless needs assessment, or any other type of planning document that we can supplement the required elements in the housing and homeless needs assessment and the housing market analysis. This document must be prepared in what we call the HUD IDIS template. So the template has very prescribed questions. And so we do answer those questions, but we do supplement those with any local data that we receive. One of the questions that we did get is, are we required to incorporate the point in time survey? And yes, we are required to incorporate the current point in time survey. That is not the only metric that we need to include, but it is required by HUD. So if there's other information that your local organizations have related to homeless needs or homeless service needs, by all means, we'd want to get a copy of that. And then finally, the key piece to the 5-year consolidated plan is the strategic plan. And what that does is uses the stakeholder consultation, the public participation information that we receive, and the hard data related to the housing market needs and housing and market needs analysis and the housing and homeless needs assessment. And we provide that information to the city, have conversations with the city, and that allows them to then formulate what that strategic plan will include. And basically, it will include the high priority issues that they want to address with their federal funds moving in the next 5 years. In addition to the 5-year consolidated plan, we're also preparing an annual action plan, as Leticia said in her opening remarks. And this, again, will be activities that the city will fund for the period of October 1st, 2023 through September 30th, 2024. As I said, this is a required HUD document, and it must be submitted to HUD no later than August 15, 2023, or the city will lose its federal resources for fiscal year 2023. I must also say that in addition to that, we are at the beginning phase of this planning process, and so you have opportunity to provide comments, as Leticia said, either this evening through written correspondence, through information that we'll provide via email, or just informing city staff regarding this throughout the planning process, and you'll see on our schedule. So again, this is at the beginning of the process, and we just want to make sure we emphasize that. This next slide just reiterates what I had previously said. The city must complete a new 5-year plan every 5 years that sets the priorities, goals, and objectives for the use of the federal funds. And again, we're in the last year of the city's current 5-year consolidated plan. And then every year during that 5-year period, the city must prepare an annual action plan that describes to the public and HUD how it intends to spend its annual allocation. And as I just said, this will be also preparing the first year of the new 5-year consolidated plan as part of this planning process. So just to give some context in terms of the last 5-year consolidated plan, actually we're in the final year of the current 5-year consolidated plan, and just wanted to provide a little bit of overview in terms of what the city prioritized in terms of high priority needs within the community 5 years ago. And so those include, as you can see on the screen, increasing affordable housing for households at 0 to 30% of AMI. And AMI means area median income. That is published by HUD on an annual basis, and it is adjusted by family size every year. And so these are the lowest income persons within the community that need housing assistance. And so you can see the city prioritized specific activities that included housing rehabilitation, home buyer programs, and emergency housing repair programs. They also included as a high priority need the public facilities and infrastructure improvements. Those included such things as sidewalk and curb improvements, street improvements, and accessibility improvements. And that really is the ADA curb cuts within the community. They also prioritized removal of blight, and that included demolition of blighted structures in the city. They had prioritized addressing the needs of the homelessness, and that included supporting homeless needs efforts and really funding operational support for emergency shelters using the Emergency Solutions Grant Funds, which are specifically used for homeless supportive shelters. And then, as you can see, public services was also prioritized. Those included such activities as code enforcement, senior services, and broadband connectivity. And then finally, administration and planning to help implement all these activities and monitor them and make sure the city stays in compliance with HUD. The city budgeted funds for administration and planning. So for program year 2022, the city annual action plan allocations went to these activities. So under the community development block grant program, the city last year funded a home repair program, a utility assistance program, funding for staffing related to code enforcement, senior meal truck and a generator for that meal truck, and again, admin and delivery. Under the home program, which is the sister program to the community development block grant program, however, activities must be focused solely for the creation or rehabilitation of affordable housing for persons between 0 and 80% of area median income. The city funded in its home program last year a single family rehab program. They provided affordable rental housing construction for to benefit households at 0 to 30% of AMI. They provided tenant-based rental assistance, TPRA, and that's basically to provide to households to help them on realize or help them pay rent if they can't afford the full amount of the rent. If they pay only 30% of their income towards the rent, and the tenant-based rental assistance picks up the balance. They also provided homeownership assistance for the new construction of affordable housing, and that was carried out by Habitat for Humanity and again, administration. And then finally, under the Emergency Solutions Grant Program, or ESG, the city provided emergency shelter assistance for homeless families, and it's basically operational support to the shelters that included Corpus Christi House and the Salvation Army, as well as administration. So as I've been saying, in order to determine the consolidated plan priorities for the next 5 years, we do various things during the CP planning process, which includes, as I've been saying, we get input at meetings such as this on community development and housing needs and homeless needs, and we're doing that as part of these council district meetings. We also get input from local stakeholders who serve persons. Stakeholders would be organizations who serve persons who are low to moderate income or at or below 80% of AMI. And we're anticipating we're going to carry these out during the month of April. We're also going to be carrying out a community-wide survey that'll be on the city's website, and that'll be conducted. Encourage anyone, either at the meeting here or friends, family, neighbors, work associates, as you spread the word about this survey. We want to get input from that survey. And again, the idea is we're trying to get input from a lot of different areas so that we can provide the city with the most information and relevant and current information so that they can adequately prioritize what eligible activities and strategic plan initiatives that they want to carry out under their new HUD 5-year consolidated plan. And then finally, as I mentioned, we also use updated demographic data from the census and/or HUD, as well as and supplement that with local information and data that we've received during the planning process. Just a little bit about the schedule. So as I indicated, we have to submit this to HUD on or before August 15th. And as I said, we're at the beginning stages of the plan preparation. And so part of that will include the city will put out applications or requests for applications from organizations that'll be sent out to these organizations on April 1st. These applications are due back by May 1st, and these applications are competitive. The city will review these, and again, will fund applications that reflect those priorities that they received during the month of April and May. They also were required to put the draft consolidated plan and annual plan on public display. We anticipate this happening on or about June 19th through July 17th. By virtue of attending these meetings, you'll be notified when this plan goes on public display. It'll be on the city's website. We would encourage everyone to review that plan and provide us with comments during that comment period. And we are required to let you know and put this plan on display for 30 days so that we receive comments. So we encourage you to review that once it goes on public display. We're also required to have another public hearing in a scenario in mid-July. And the purpose of that is to really, again, present the priorities for the next 5 years that were established during the planning process and how to spend its first year funds under the CDBG Home and ESG program. We anticipate having that in mid-July, and we are required to do that under the HUD consolidated plan requirements. And then finally, before we can submit this to HUD in mid-August, we require City Council to approve this. And we anticipate this happening by the end of July. That will give us enough time to take into account any comments, and then not only that, but package the 5-year consolidated plan and annual action plan and submit it to HUD in what we call IDIS, the system that HUD requires us to submit this in, again, on or before August 15th. As Leticia, I think, said in her opening comments, HUD has already provided the city with its allocations for this coming year, and the city anticipates will receive, a little over $2.6 million in community development block grant funds, a little over $1.3 million in home funds, and $235,000 for ESG funds. So, CDBG program. Just a little bit of an overview on what can and can't be, these funds can and can't be used for. So the eligible activities under CDBG include such things as housing rehabilitation, home ownership assistance, public facilities improvements, blight removal, code enforcement, economic development, acquisition of real property or disposition of real property, and public services. The city is not required to fund all these. It could fund one or more as it sees fit, based on the priorities that it identifies during this 5-year consolidated plan process. We always have to say that the CDBG public services, for the types of things that you see on the right-hand side of the screen there, we are limited. HUD limits the amount of CDBG grant funds that can go to these types of activities, and they are capped at 15%. So no more than 15% of your annual allocation of CDBG funds can go to these public service type activities. I should also say, before we get to this point, the city, in terms of, we've had this question this week as well, what are the administrative amounts or caps under these programs? HUD allows up to 20% of funds to be used for administration purposes for CDBG, 10% for home, and 7.5% for ESG. So those are the percentages that are allowable under these programs. In addition to funding an eligible activity under CDBG, the activity must also meet at least one of the following 3 national objectives. So the activity that the city funds with its CDBG funds must benefit the low and moderate income persons, and at least 70% of that grant amount of the city's CDBG grant allocation must go to benefit low to moderate income persons. And no more than 30% of the grant can go towards the prevention or elimination of blight, i.e. demolition. And then finally, a very rarely used eligible or national objective would be meeting urgent needs when welfare and health are threatened. And that's generally after a natural disaster that is used, but it's very rarely used. So what are some eligible CDBG program costs? Again, as I indicated, it can pay for admin and staff costs, personnel, office, facility, rental, or lease costs, materials and supplies, and communications. But more importantly, things that are ineligible costs under the CDBG program, and those include such things as fundraising, political activities, expenses to carry out regular responsibilities or functions of a local government, income payments, or use of general conduct of government. It also includes the purchase of equipment. You can't use it for the purchase of equipment and fixtures. Again, these are examples. These are not a full representative of all eligible uses of the funds. As I said earlier, the HOME program, the Home Investment Partnerships Program, or HOME for short, is a sister program to the CDBG program, and it's for affordable housing for low to moderate income persons. Eligible activities include housing rehabilitation, homeownership assistance, new construction of affordable housing, and tenant-based rental assistance. In addition, a minimum of the home allocation every year, a minimum of 15% of the home funds must be allocated to projects carried out by community development, community housing development organizations, or CHODOs. These are community-based nonprofit organizations whose focus is creation or rehabilitation of affordable housing for low to moderate income person, and it must meet certain board composition requirements, including having residents of their neighborhood on their boards. And then the Emergency Solutions Grant Program, again, this is for homeless shelter operation costs and services for homelessness and to address homelessness. Eligible activities include street outreach, homeless prevention, operational costs related to emergency shelters, rapid rehousing assistance, HMIS, which is the actual computer system that the city uses to track homeless persons who receive assistance, and then administrative activities. So before we go to questions or inputs on need, I did want to share this slide. As we indicated, you can provide information to these folks on the screen, to Letitia, that is her email address, to Tracy, and to, related to homelessness, Nora Vargas is the city's homeless services program manager. And so we wanted to share that contact with you as well. These are their email addresses, and you can contact them at any time to provide any types of contact or any types of input that you want to provide on the planning process. So with that, again, I want to stop sharing my screen. And I want to then make sure that there aren't any questions. And so before we jump into the questions, is there any questions on the planning process, on any information on eligibility under these programs, anything related to the PowerPoint presentation that I just presented?
What was the amount allocated for ESG?
235.
It was like 236,000, something like that.
For 5 years?
No, that's an annual allocation for this year. It changes every year. You'll get, the city gets an annual allocation every year. So that's just for this coming year.
Okay.
Any other questions? Go ahead, sir.
So many of y'all probably know about the program Thanksgiving Homes here in Corpus Christi. It was started a few years ago. They built their 100th house, completed it, I guess in the last 30, 45 days. It's an infill housing program, and it's been very successful throughout the community, and especially Flower Bluff, where you've seen the benefits of it overall with NAS. With things being identified within the program of addressing blight, and then also I saw the acquisition of real property is one of their challenges, Thanksgiving Homes challenges in order to continue that program is to find inexpensive lots. And a lot of the inexpensive lots they're finding have blight on them. And so is there a way that we can help Thanksgiving Homes continue to do their good work by using some funds here to address blight and possibly find a way to continue to feed that engine, which is provide them with low-cost infill lots for affordable housing?
Did you want me to answer that, Letitia?
Sure.
Yes, I mean, that is an actual allocation you could use for acquisition of these blighted properties. You could use funds to, if the housing unit is not eligible to be rehabilitated, you could use funds to demo the lot and then convey them. Typically, the issue with those types of programs is that you need to be able to get clear title to the properties first before you can convey them. But I've seen those activities and programs done across the country in our travel. So yes, you can actually go out and acquire those and then convey those to the nonprofit to create new units on or rehabilitate the existing units for affordable housing. As long as they meet that low mod benefit of at the end of the day that acquisition leads to the creation of a affordable housing unit or removes blight and meets a national objective.
Okay, so this is an open forum. If you want to just voice your opinion or share your input on what you think District 4 in general, citywide, we could utilize these funds and take those into consideration for the development of the 5-year plan.
I'm Shirley Thornton. I am the president of the school board of Flowerbrook Independent School District. And I also work with these two gentlemen with the Flowerbrook Citizens Council. And over the last few months, we have sent out surveys to the community. What kinds of things do you see that need to happen? And one of them definitely was the blighted areas and those kinds of things that we still, and that's been on our list for a long time. But one of the others was, of course, issues with mobility. And in particular, where are we? The street right out here, Glen Oak. Glen Oak is a very busy street. There are lots of new neighborhoods at one end of it, which means we have lots of kids walking because the school is right here. This end is older neighborhoods. There is absolutely no sidewalk down this way past the ball fields where the houses are. So my question is, because I saw that sidewalks were possibly part of the grant. And I know that there was some good work done down near up in S Drive in one of the older neighborhoods where I grew up as a kid, and they had put in sidewalks, and it really helped the neighborhood. This particular street, because we have 2 Section 8 housing units on the street, we also have, as I said, multiple neighborhoods, both directions. We also have all kinds of, and it's a 2-way street. I mean, it's a narrow road, and we only have one small section of all of Glen Oak that really has an ample sidewalk. So my question is that something that we could put on the list for possible funding?
Sure, so sidewalks is eligible under CDBG under specific conditions and have to serve a low mod group. Bill, did you want to add to that as well? We have funded in the past before Sunnybrook sidewalks, which is closer to Ayers a couple of years ago, and we did both sides. But for that same reason, accessibility for the children. Bill, did you have anything to add for that, sir?
I did. When we do sidewalks, that is an eligible activity. We can carry those out. What we have to be careful about is we really have to look at the surface area. So I'm not sure of the specific road that you're speaking about, but if it is a major thoroughfare that serves multiple neighborhoods, we have to make sure that any sidewalk improvements that are made or new sidewalks that are put in, really looking at the service area, who's going to benefit from those sidewalks, and making sure that those beneficiaries are primarily what we call low to moderate income persons. So meaning at least 51% of the residents or persons who will benefit from that improvement will be low to moderate income. So we just have to take that into consideration for sidewalk projects. It is an eligible activity, but absolutely we can do that, but we just have to look at the service area so that we're making sure we only serve low mod persons.
Under the infrastructure.
Okay.
Eligible activity, yes, sir.
Related to that, it's a great idea, Shirley, except I think Glen Oak is already on the reconstruction list for the next 2 or 3 years.
To include sidewalks?
Yeah, so they're not gonna do sidewalks because they're gonna have to go into their tear out infrastructure and utilities and things when they do that. So it's gonna happen through a different means, but we're just gonna have.
And is it going to go all the way to Deborah? Because this is the end of.
No, I think it's only going from Waldron to, so you could possibly live in.
On this end, yeah, because I think there are bits and pieces, you're right, because there is you know, we're in the land of where the sidewalk ends. Because we have a sidewalk here and then no sidewalk, and then, you know, that's just kind of the way it is out here. But this particular street is an issue, and Don Patricio is the other one that we talked about, because it's a heavily traveled road, but I don't know that it'll meet the requirements. I don't know how you determine the LMI. Is that what it is? LMI.
So we go by census tracts, and those CDBG census tracts are established by HUD.
And the percentage is like 50, is it 51%? 51%, okay.
And just to add to that note, Councilman Supley, is if those type of infrastructure projects are already under some type of capital improvement plan on the city side, and at that point, CDBG cannot be used to come and supply.
Okay.
Just keep Okay. So infrastructure, I think, is on our list as well, correct? Bill? Sidewalks is a popular.
That is correct.
Could you give some examples of how the funds have been used for the home improvement or the home funds? How are those utilized? What's a practical application or example of a
Sure.
success story with that group?
Great question. So, we're up on Glen Oak here, Village at Henderson. We funded, part of that project under the home funds for affordable housing. And what happens is, once the developer qualifies under our criteria, then we, assist with funding of the project, especially if it's a low income housing tax credit projects. And we leverage those funds with the developer who puts in private funds, and then the tax credits from the state, and then they have to meet. So Village at Henderson is one example. Village of McCardle is another example. We leverage home funds as well. And Village at Henderson is another project that we leverage.
Okay, so primarily large developments, not to help individual homeowners that are in the poverty level that need improvements to their home.
That's separate. Home funding also, we have our departmental programs, which is for single family rehab. And that's for the rehabilitation of the home, and also the actual demolition and reconstruction of the home. The house is 51% or more. So standard. We also, and that's funded through home.
Does any of this mix match, or is it totally separate than the Corpus Christi Capital Improvement Corporation? The CCIC, they used to give out 3% money to multifamily properties to make improvements in low-income areas.
Yes.
Is that something the city's still doing, or?
We do have a corporation with, are you talking about type A or specific to the finance corporation?
That's exactly right, CCCIC, yes. Is that a part of this, or that's separate?
No, that's.
Okay, thank you. That's what I was curious about.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to temper my comments with a few things in mind. I am having difficulty summarizing my thoughts, but like I acknowledge there are a lot of limitations. Staff and other folks have come up against time constraints, systemic barriers, all of that, but I am pretty disappointed in the turnout tonight, and I think it's a reflection of kind of a bad faith attempt to get votes here. I know there are a lot of things out of control. As someone who's had to set up meetings many times, I know it is very hard to actually, the question of how do we get public participation, how do we get community input is not something that is solved in any particular meeting. I want to acknowledge all of that. I want it to come forward in good faith, but it does feel, and I think there are things that indicate that a lot of this is an issue of optics, of being able to check off the box that we did a meeting to get public input. But I am struck by the public that's here, right? What attempts were made to get low income and no income folks to this meeting, and I am disappointed by that. Again, I really do want to acknowledge how hard the work that folks are doing is, and just how complicated everything is, right? I absolutely am not like trying to demonize anyone, but it is to say that I think that's a conversation to be had about the work that there is to get more folks who are impacted by these issues here, right? If the objective is to get public input here, then it is alarming to me how many of these seats are empty. Yeah, so just wanted to flag that to start. The other thing that I wanted to bring up that I would really like to see a reprioritization of getting the low barrier shelter, which is something that was previously on the council's agenda and has seemingly been abandoned. I know Mayor Hardo's preferred the name open entry shelter, which as a communications worker, I think is a good rebrand of it. At any rate, I just do want to say that like giving $1.1 million away to the Salvation Army or a nonprofit in general is like not a solution that sits well with me or sits well with a lot of unhoused folks or people who use those services. I work for a nonprofit, so that is no shade to the people who are working very hard at the Salvation Army. But the objective of a nonprofit is to try to address the needs of people who have fallen through the cracks of the system. Am I watching some talking to it? The cracks of the system, right? And so like, I think at some point we have to ask why so many people are falling through the cracks of the system. I know that is like beyond the scope of this particular meeting, but it is something I wanted to bring up, the space for community input, right? And so I think that like, what I would like to see as someone in this community, as someone who, has worked with unhoused folks, and was previously a teacher and came up, against a lot of these issues with my students, right, in terms of housing insecurity, is I would like to see a budget that actually reflects that we are addressing these needs and not putting the bill to a nonprofit to address the needs of the people in our communities who have fallen through those cracks, and also like reduce the size of those cracks, right? So yeah, I would just like to say that enormous thank you to Jim and Sylvia, who thankfully let me know that this meeting was happening. Otherwise, I would not have been here. I know there were some attempts to let the media know that this was happening. I know there was something put in the Caller Times. Unfortunately, in a world where everyone is monitoring the newsroom page on the city's website, it's very hard for working people to prioritize this. I rushed after work to get here. I live in District 4. I'm fortunate enough to have been able to work from home today, so I wouldn't have to come from my office, which is downtown, in which case I would have been much later than I was, right? So yeah, I think that's the best that I can do to kind of summarize some of my concerns as someone in this community who cares deeply about housing justice and addressing housing insecurity, especially with our littles. So sorry for taking so much time.
No, that's why we're here, and you bring up good points. We brought up on the other districts as well. We did formally market the meetings 3 weeks ago. I've been sending out social media flashes, reminders. And then again, when it comes up that day of the meeting, that's just a reminder. Usually there's something in the back end that has already been sent out. We're also recording the news Facebook Live, and we're going to go on YouTube. Give you other avenues as well to be able to send us comments via our email addresses. You can always come up to Neighborhood Services on the second floor, and then we do promote it also on the website. And that's Neighborhood Services website. All the folks might need to dig a little bit on the main city's website, and that's something that links. But we're Neighborhood Services. That's somewhere that's just quicker. The other item that you discussed in terms of homelessness and shelters and things of that nature, we're strongly forming partnerships with the social service agencies that do have the capacity to be able to provide the services. And one of the things that I just want to make clear is that these HUD funds, all of them, CDBG, ESG, and HOME, work on a reimbursement basis. So the nonprofits that are being funded, not only do they have to meet the criteria and their activity and their program, they go through a pretty intense vetting process to be able to respond to our notice of funding availability, look at all their documentation, and we still have to rate them and do a risk assessment on them, and it's pretty man-hour heavy, staff would tell you. And then from there, we prepare a draft plan to council. But before that even happens, we're having these meetings to get input, because this is your opportunity to actually give us feedback and help us to establish those priorities. So besides these meetings that are taking place per district and have been per district, and you can attend any of the other district meetings, even if you don't live there. We also are planning to have stakeholder meetings, going back to Bill's slide, that also is going to include those social service agencies that typically apply for funding and that have been vetted, and those new ones, grassroots organizations, right? And so you're more than welcome as a citizen to attend those as well. So you'll have plenty of opportunity. So we hear you. Again, going back to partnerships, it's all about staff capacity, right? And showing that you're able to meet that need. In terms of filling the gaps, unless we have meetings like this, unless we're catching something on the monitoring side, because that's another thing we do, is there's levels of monitoring. Not only do we vet them, award them, but then we go through and monitor them. So we go through a level of monitoring with the agencies, and then also our internal audit our departments to make sure we're implementing the programs. And then the top tier of auditing is now HUD comes down and does the monitoring. So there's a hierarchy and there's a process for that. We also have staff here from the homeless team group, and if you want to have offline conversations, you're more than welcome to do that. But we're definitely open and here to listen to feedback. So we appreciate it.
I just have a quick question. In terms of distribution of the funds, is it going to be something where you try to do it evenly throughout the different districts, or is it citywide? How do you do that?
It's citywide and depends who applies to us, right? So, and then when you do apply to us, how much money the agencies are requesting. So that's up to the agencies and what they can handle on their part. You know, what's in their capital reserves. One asks for $1 million. Do you have $1 million to spend up front? I apologize for my voice. I just got over a bad cold. And so that's controlled by whoever applies for the funding. That's how it's distributed. And of course, when we draft a plan for approval from the city council, which is required as part of the submittal to HUD. Does that answer your question?
I think it does. Yes, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
So, sorry, I do homeless outreach with the Free Store, which is, it's a nonprofit, but so essentially for ESG, it's whoever applies for those funds.
Right, if you meet the criteria as a nonprofit organization. A lot of that has to do with track record, again, financials, showing we have the financial capacity, the staff capacity. And I think, Bill, you spoke to this a little bit last night as well. Do you want to add a couple of comments to that?
Yeah, we have to be careful when we, with ESG funds, the majority of those funds, at least 60% of those funds have to go to supplement shelter operations. That's a requirement. 40% can go to street outreach and street outreach and rapid rehousing. So there is internal, as Leticia said, there's internal requirements that we must meet under these grant programs. And again, it's primarily to support the operations of shelters, ESG funds.
And so again, that's all grants, correct?
Yes.
And
So like organizations
yeah,
have
not only
to
that,
have a grant writer in order to get those funds.
Not necessarily, no.
Or, but a grant writer would have to essentially, or somebody who writes grants would have to.
So we are the grant writer on behalf of the city. So once we receive the allocation, we put together the plan. That's the plan to HUD. What we then do are the pass-through to subrecipients for nonprofits. And so the way we award that is through the NOFA, which is the Notice of Funding Availability. That's an application that the nonprofit, in your case, would fill out and submit to us with all the document requirements. And then we would bid.
Um,
Can I add?
Go ahead.
Leticia, I did forget to mention that ESG requires a one-to-one match. So for every request and award of dollars of ESG dollars, they must be matched one-to-one by the nonprofit organization as well.
So essentially the ratio is if you're gonna ask for $50,000, then you have to match $50,000 on your side.
Okay.
So then you're at $100,000.
When you say, I'm sorry,
oh, go ahead.
when you say match, you need to have that amount of money in your bank account showing proof of funds
You have to,
or a commitment that I'm going to spend that amount of money on
Yeah.
the project.
so you have to show your capacity to be able to spend that money because it is a reimbursement process.
Mhm.
And then the match then is separate from that. So for every dollar you get for ESG, you have to match it, whether that's programming, staffing,
Okay,
operations.
thank you.
Mhm.
Volunteer hours count towards that as well?
We
or
do
the-
have some in-kind donation.
Okay.
that we, give credit to.
I have a question. What is the city doing to prevent homelessness or eradicate poverty?
We
Like
do-
on an everyday basis, what are we doing?
Okay, so we do have a group, Homeless Services and Workforce Housing, been tasked to do outreach, apply for other funding to support that initiative. And under our city manager, Mr. Peter Zanoni, he actually created that division specifically dedicated to that cause. And certainly we have Amanda here if she wants to add a couple of comments, but certainly you can take her card, you can email her, or you can have an offline conversation. And just to make it clear, that group is 100% funded through the general fund. On our side, when we manage the grants on my side, which is the grant monitoring division, we are 100% funded by grants. So just wanted to.
So tell me if I'm mischaracterizing this, right? But if here's the umbrella of neighborhood services, homelessness services is umbrella under it, but is being allocated less funding than
Everything else.
everything else, including animal services. What's the name? What's the line item on the budget called? Right? How?
I was gonna bring that up.
I don't even know how to, because it's so bizarre to me and like inhumane. I say this as a vegan, so I love animals, not to be like that, but like I don't know how, if a budget is a reflection of our priorities and is a moral document, I don't know how we can justify that really wild allocation of funding. I know that this is a question, again, that like extends beyond the scope of this meeting, but we're here and there are ears here, and I work during every city council meeting. And I'm already in touch with the council members who are willing to be responsive. So given that this is the only space for me to air this grievance, other than the channels that have already been open and welcoming to addressing these concerns, I'm gonna raise them. That like, I know folks are trying to do good work. How do we get more funding for the things that we want to see prioritized? Just continuing to be a thorn in the
We
side
spent
of
like $4 million on animal control services or something at like 389,000 last year on homelessness.
So, funding the homeless division out of the general fund is separate from this one, okay? And then again, as Bill mentioned and alluded to in the beginning of the meeting, that's based on a formula that Hudson's nationwide to all participating jurisdictions, which mean those cities that qualify for this funding because of the work that we do internally. And so we have no control over that. So that is all 100% dependent on the feds, and when they approve that budget, what's trickled down to the cities. And so usually ESG is right, has the lower amount. We're not the only city. Again, that is based on a formula that HUD sends out. We have no control over that. We just want to receive whatever they do give us, right? And we want to be able to push it out into the community the best that we can. And we do rely heavily on those partnerships, and even here citywide, social service agencies that provide services specific for that, they're limited in their staff capacity as well. And that's not something that only the city of Corpus Christi is challenged with, especially when you have even spending the COVID funds as well. They have to have the capacity. Even with COVID funds, it's still reimbursed. So they have to have that capacity. And so I don't know if that answered your question, but that's some of the same things that we have to deal with as staff. Bill, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think you pretty perfectly.
I would like to mention that you inferred a lack of responsiveness. I've only been a councilman for 10 weeks, but I've never heard from you, and I'm available. So if there's something
My organization has reached out to you, and when you were running, you said that you weren't informed enough to respond to us.
That was probably one of the 50 questionnaires I got when I decided to run.
And so because of that, that indicated a lack of interest in responding to the things that we asked you about.
That would not be the case. And so I encourage you to reach out to me. Again, I'm very responsive. And you have my cell phone number and you have my email address. So if there's something.
I will reach out to you, but again, like your response when you were running did not indicate that you were the least bit interested in interacting with the organization.
I don't know what organization you're with, but like I said, I received probably 50 questionnaires from people, and I did my very best to respond to all 50 of those questionnaires. If I missed one or two, sounds like I did respond.
You didn't miss it. You responded and said you weren't going to fill it out because you weren't informed.
I'll be here for a while longer, so I'm glad to talk to you some more.
Yes, sir, but I think it would just behoove you to interact with your constituents, like. You were the least bit accountable as someone who wasn't actually elected.
Okay, so I think at this point, just to keep the meeting on task, it sounds like there's an opportunity to have an offline conversation.
I'd be more than happy to.
Encourage to reach out to Councilman Supley. And then anything we can do on your behalf, again, conversation doesn't need to end here.
Absolutely.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, I was just going to say, I'll give him a chance. We've called him multiple times. It's been that fast on different things, right? Because after he was elected, because you got to get in and know what you're doing. But he has been very responsive. I'm just going to say
that, but it does indicate that he is willing to serve certain communities' interests.
I just had an experience.
And perhaps not others.
I just had an experience with him a couple weeks ago, right here by Flowerville Junior High, cleaning up the corner there. Across from Deborah.
I'm not saying that Councilman Suckley has not done other good work. I'm not trying to demonize him. I'm saying my experiences have differed than from other people's.
Yeah, I just think after he's been elected,
entitled to
it's a good
yours.
idea to just follow up with them.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. Okay. We're nearing the end of time, a little over, but we started a little over, so we want to definitely leave the open forum for interaction, continued input. That's what it's all about. Yes, ma'am.
Is there any way to possibly, I know that she talked about low barrier shelters. Is there any way of possibly doing something like low barrier jobs to also help people that are suffering from extreme poverty?
There are some activities, again, that qualify as supportive services, to be like your rental assistance, utility assistance, job training, under some of the funding. However, and then I don't know if you all are familiar, I know we've been sharing this throughout the other district public needs assessment meetings. We recently took a home ARP allocation plan to council for $4.2 million for exactly that, supportive service in TIBRA. And so that's going for second reading next week. And that's another initiative that we're pursuing, to take on homelessness initiatives.
I just think that would be something that would be useful for getting from point A to point B, especially if you don't have identifying documents or money to get those documents, if you don't have clean clothes or the ability to necessarily take a shower every day, things like that. Like, we don't have community showers, we don't have community laundry, and those things are not easy to come by. You know, I know people, like I said, I do a lot of homeless outreach. I know people that have jobs that are like, that work multiple jobs that are living out of their cars. And that to me is insane. Our poverty rate here in Corpus Christi is 17%, according to our last census. We have 21.4 people, or 21.4% of people under 65 without health insurance. And our population is only 317,000. Nashville, which has been nationally recognized as having a homelessness crisis, like they've been all over the news for it recently, their poverty rate is 14.5%. Their median rent is $12.50, ours is $10.99, and the people without insurance is 14%, and their population by comparison is 678,000.
So the census data is something that we do take into account in the development of this particular plan. That's going to be one of the data sources. And they'll register in our plan, correct, Bill?
That is correct. That's correct.
What do you mean by low barrier jobs? I've never heard that term. What is an example of that?
Low or no barrier means that, like, there's not a lot of barriers to get something. Like, for instance, when you go and apply for like low barrier, like government housing, you've got to give them, and I know because I've done this, you've got to give them a birth certificate, a social security card. You've got to give them, of course, your driver's license and all of your paycheck stubs.
But isn't that normal for like anywhere? I mean, that's the same information that
But
anybody
if
has,
you're
right?
homeless, you don't have those documents, right?
Okay, I get
So-
what you're saying with
How
that.
much money is your birth certificate is $33, your driver's license is about 20, social security card is like 10, plus the time and money and everything else to get that done. Those are all barriers, right?
Okay,
So also, usually you have to have one form of identification to get another. You
Right.
can't, you gotta have something, you gotta have a driver's license to get your social security card or vice versa.
are you familiar with Rising Tide here in Flower Bluff?
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go see Lisa Gertis at Rising Tide Ministry, because she has programs for all of what you were talking
Yeah,
about.
she's got
All
it
the
figured out.
fees, she knows how to get all through all the loops, and she helps hundreds of people all the time with that specific thing you're speaking about.
That's right.
Last year, she helped relocate 78 people back to homes where they had family support systems. And she has grant money to help you get driver's license, IDs, birth certificates, all that
All
stuff.
those things.
Bus tickets.
Bus tickets.
Rising
Or,
Tide
yeah.
is an entity that we actually funded.
Yeah.
For a job training program, and along with that, these are some of the supportive services.
And she has her heartbeat down with how to navigate all this stuff.
Mhm.
And she's one organization, and again,
I know there's another
Salvation
one
Army,
downtown,
Corpus
yeah.
Christi, Whole Paso.
Well, but as far as District 4 area, which Lisa will help anybody in Corpus, but I mean, a lot of the problem I know you're saying is these people can't get downtown to those other resources, when Lisa is a local resource here for a lot of that same stuff.
And she provides transportation.
And she does provide transportation.
To the, like the opposite.
To take
Yep,
folks.
wherever they need to go.
Yep.
That's awesome, thank you. I will write that down.
Yeah, just wanted to flag that, like, another one of the barriers, aside from, the sort of logistical concerns about like how to get the documents required to apply for many jobs, is like substance or users or people struggling with mental health issues. And given what we know about the unhoused population, huge concern in terms of transitioning out of homelessness and being able to be self-sufficient. A real question, and I, again, like I'm asking in good faith, does Rising Tide work with folks who are dealing with those kinds of issues?
All the time.
All the time.
All the time.
Amazing. Again, like
No.
absolutely asking
Yeah.
a very real question.
I'm sorry?
Criminal records as well?
Sure.
Yeah.
Lisa doesn't judge. She's there to give you a hand up, not a hand out. So she's got she's got an entire classroom, half the size of this room right here, to teach you how to do any type of job skill. And it's all been grants that a lot of us in the community have helped her to secure those grants in the city.
She even teaches people how to do interviews. She helps them with their clothing. She helps them with just the way they look, their hair, their nails, everything.
Lisa what?
Gerdes, Gerdes. And I can give you her number as well.
Give her the one from.
And do we have any shelters? We have shelters here in the bluff, do we?
No, we do not.
That's another thing. I believe all of our shelters are mostly concentrated in the downtown area. We don't have
And
shelters.
the reason for that is because 90-something% or more of all the resources in the city are located down that way.
Central Lesser.
The only two resources here in Flower Bluff are Rising Tide and Timmins. So to put a housing shelter out here would actually not be advantageous for the fact that then they're still gonna have to be bused across town to Amistad for healthcare and to the different resources that are already in place. That's the only reason that I've ever understood why there's not here.
Because I know there's a bunch of them on the south side.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Like and it sucks because like where we do outreach, it's at South Bluff Park. And so there's a large concentration of people down there, but there's still so many people on the south side. And there's quite a few of them here too. And I feel bad because there's not very many resources. And when we do outreach, it's usually on a Sunday. And so buses aren't running. And I've talked to RTA and I'm like, hey, are y'all gonna do can y'all do more frequent bus routes on Sundays? So maybe we can get some more people down there. And they're like, no, we're actually gonna stop because gas has gotten too expensive. And I'm like, great, thanks.
And we hear you, we don't, passionate about homelessness initiatives, and that's definitely something that we have listed as a reoccurring thing, right? This Bill mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. I think we have time for one more comment or feedback. Anybody would like to? If not, with that, I would like Councilman Suppley, if you want to do some closing remarks.
Yeah, no, I mean,
We'll wrap up the meeting.
great information from everybody, and, certainly we could have had more folks here. The issue of getting information out to staff was brought up at the council meeting today, or getting information out to the community was brought up at the council meeting, so I think that was taken to heart by staff, and I know we have some changes in our public relations department and things, and so they're trying to figure out ways to better improve with the community in terms of sharing information, so I think they're working on doing that. So, thanks for coming.
Thank you, Bill. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.